From a defendant who smuggled bottles of urine into court and threw them at his own lawyer, to a war criminal who drank poison live in front of the entire tribunal, when the verdict came down, these people made sure nobody in that courtroom forgot it. Deobra Redden. It was the 3rd of January 2024 in a Clark County District Court in Las Vegas, and Deobra Redden was there to be sentenced in a felony battery case. Judge Mary K. Holthus had presided over his cases before and knew his record well. She told him she was going to impose prison time, and as she began to deliver the sentence, Redden told the court he did not feel like he should be going to prison at all. Then he vaulted over her 4-foot bench. He landed directly on top of the 6'2" judge, grabbed her by the hair, and slammed her head into the wall behind the bench. An American flag came down on top of them both during the struggle. Her courtroom marshal and law clerk rushed in immediately to pull Redden off. By the time it was over, the marshal had a bleeding gash on his forehead and a dislocated shoulder, and the law clerk had sustained abrasions from the fight. Holthus was treated for injuries but was back on the bench the very next day. After the attack, Redden reportedly told corrections officers that he had had a bad day and had tried to kill her. His defense argued that he had been off his prescribed medication for schizophrenia at the time and that his mental illness had played a significant role. He pleaded guilty but mentally ill to attempted murder and 5 additional charges. In December 2024, a second judge sentenced him to 26 to 65 years in prison, with parole eligibility landing sometime in the 2050s. The sentencing judge noted that every medical professional who had evaluated Redden concluded he understood the difference between right and wrong. Darrell Brooks.
It is disrespectful to me that you think I would come in here purposely and treat this like a joke or a game.
I never said it was a joke.
What type of statement is that?
The Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin had been a community tradition for nearly 6 decades, and on the 21st of November, 2021, families lined the streets as they had done every year. Darrell Brooks drove his red Ford Escape into that crowd at roughly 40 miles per hour, zigzagging through the parade route while bodies flew over the hood of his vehicle. Witnesses described watching people go over the car like speed bumps. By the time police stopped him, 69 people had been struck. 6 of them died, including an 8-year-old boy named Jackson Sparks. The victims also included 4 members of the Milwaukee Dancing Grannies, a beloved local performance group that had been a fixture in the parade for years. Investigators found that Brooks had been involved in a domestic dispute just minutes before driving into the parade route. At trial, he fired his lawyers and chose to represent himself. He declared himself a sovereign citizen, argued that the state of Wisconsin had no legal authority over him, and went on lengthy rants about theories the judge rejected every single time. He was repeatedly removed from the courtroom for disrupting proceedings and had to watch large portions of his own trial through a video feed from a separate room. During the 2-day sentencing hearing, as victims read their impact statements, Brooks rolled his eyes. He was convicted on all 76 counts, including 6 counts of first-degree intentional homicide. Judge Jennifer Doro sentenced him to 6 consecutive life sentences without any possibility of parole, plus an additional 762.5 years for the remaining charges. Ronnie O'Neal III.
You will see who is the mass murderer.
On the night of the 18th of March 2018, in Riverview, Florida, 911 dispatchers received a call from a woman named Kenyatta Barron, who had just been shot by her ex-boyfriend. Ronnie O'Neal III had shot and beaten Kenyatta inside their home. He then turned to his children. He attacked his 9-year-old daughter Ron Nevea, who had special needs and was non-verbal, with a hatchet. He then stabbed his 8-year-old son Ronnie O'Neal IV multiple times and set the house on fire. Ron Nevea did not survive. Her younger brother barely did, and it was him, burned and bleeding, who managed to make it out of the garage and tell the deputies arriving on scene, "My father shot my mother." O'Neal chose to represent himself at trial. He screamed at the jury throughout his opening statement, accused investigators of fabricating evidence, and at one point cross-examined his own son, who was 11 years old by the time the case went to trial, about the night he witnessed his family be killed. O'Neal was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, arson, and aggravated child abuse. He was sentenced on the 23rd of July 2021 to 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole, plus an additional 90 years. Taylor Schabusiness. In February 2022, Tara Pakanich came home to her house in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and found her 2 4-year-old son's severed head inside a green bucket in the basement. Shad Thirian had been at his mother's home with his ex-girlfriend Taylor Schabusiness. The two had been smoking methamphetamine together in the basement before Schabusiness strangled him, decapitated him, and dismembered the rest of his body. She left parts of him scattered throughout the house and placed more in a vehicle parked outside. Before leaving the scene entirely, she also removed the ankle monitoring bracelet she had been court-ordered to wear. Prosecutors at trial argued that Schabusiness had demonstrated zero remorse, pointing to the calm and even glib manner in which she had described what she did when investigators spoke with her. The jury took just over 30 minutes to convict. Before the case even reached trial, Schabusiness had attacked her own defense attorney, Quinn Jolly, during a competency hearing. By the time sentencing came around in September 2023, she arrived in court wearing a spit hood because she had been spitting on jail staff in the months prior. She was convicted on all 3 counts: first-degree intentional homicide, third-degree sexual assault, and mutilating a corpse. The jury also rejected her insanity defense. She got sentenced Schabusiness to life in prison without the possibility of parole, with an additional 18 years for the dismemberment and sexual assault charges. Slobodan Praljak.
Commander of Bosnian Croat forces, Slobodan Praljak has done.
Between 1992 and 1994, during the Bosnian War, Slobodan Praljak served as the wartime commander of Bosnian Croat forces in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He was convicted by the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia of participating in a joint criminal enterprise whose goal was to ethnically cleanse the Muslim population from parts of Bosnia. His crimes included murder, persecution, and the deportation of Bosnian Muslims, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Praljak appealed the conviction, maintaining throughout the entire process that the tribunal had no business finding him guilty of anything. The appeal hearing on the 29th of November, 2017, in The Hague, was also the final case the ICTY would ever hear. The tribunal had operated for 24 years and was about to close permanently. But the appeals chamber upheld both the conviction and the 2-0-year sentence. Praljak stood up, addressed the judges, and told the court he rejected the verdict with contempt and that he was not a war criminal. Then he raised a small vial to his lips, drank from it, and told the room he had just taken poison. The presiding judge immediately suspended proceedings and called for the curtains to be drawn. He was rushed to the hospital but did not survive. Dutch prosecutors later confirmed the cause of death was potassium cyanide poisoning. Investigators reviewed all available security footage and interviewed dozens of staff members, but were never able to determine how he had gotten the vial into the courtroom. He was 72 years old. Michael Madison.
Dramatic moments in the sentencing of convicted serial killer Michael Madison.
In July 2013, employees at a cable company in East Cleveland, Ohio, noticed an overwhelming smell coming from the garage behind their building. When investigators arrived and searched the area, they found 3 women wrapped in garbage bags near the second-floor apartment of Michael Madison. Angela Deskins was 38. Shatisha Sheely was 28. Sherelda Terry was 18 years old and had been working a summer job at a local elementary school when she went missing. Madison later admitted to strangling one of the women in October 2012 and going out drinking while her body was still in his apartment. He claimed he had simply woken up next to one of the others and had no memory of what had happened. Investigators believed he had killed all 3 over a span of roughly 9 months. He had reportedly expressed admiration for Anthony Sowell, an Ohio serial killer who had operated in a similar way and whose case had come to light just years before. His trial began in April 2016, and the jury returned a guilty verdict on all 13 counts in less than a single day of deliberation. At sentencing on the 2nd of June 2016, victim family members came forward to address the court. When Sherelda, Terry's father, Van Terry, stepped up to the podium, he saw Madison smirking in the direction of the families. Van Terry turned, said what he had to say, and then lunged at Madison before deputies could step in between them. He was released without any charges. Madison was sentenced to death by Judge Nancy R. McDonnell that same day. The Ohio Supreme Court unanimously upheld that sentence in 2020. but his execution has since been stayed, pending the exhaustion of his post-conviction appeals. Ricky Hand.
Video you're looking at is of that incident. Here, Hand was at sentencing for multiple armed robberies.
Ricky Hand had spent the better part of early 2016 robbing businesses across Springfield, Ohio, hitting drive-thrus, fast food restaurants, bars, and a nail salon. He used a weapon in most of the incidents, and though the gun turned out to be fake in some cases, his victims had no way of knowing that. He had only been out of prison on parole from a previous robbery conviction for less than 6 months when the new spree started. Police estimated he committed around 30 robberies in total, and at one point during an attempted robbery, a store clerk shot him. He pleaded guilty to 7 charges and was brought in front of Clark County Common Pleas Judge Richard O'Neill for sentencing in June 2016. But Hand had been preparing for this day. Over the weeks leading up to his court date, he had been filling bottles with his own urine and feces in his jail cell. On sentencing day, he hid 4 of those bottles in his arm sling and inside his pants and carried them into the courtroom without being searched. When Judge O'Neill told him he was going to prison for 40 years, Hand interrupted and asked the judge to confirm whether he had actually heard that correctly. When the judge said yes, Hand reached into his arm sling, pulled out a bottle, and threw the contents directly at his defense attorney. Deputies tackled him almost immediately, but not before the liquids hit his attorney and 4 other people in the room. Officers found all 4 bottles on him when they searched him afterward. He was charged with 5 additional counts of harassment, with a bodily substance on top of the 40-year sentence he already had. Base Webb.
Barreled down on 2 jailers, hitting and nearly killing them. Webb is also a suspect in the murder of Brea Runowitz, Webb's girlfriend, who also...
In 2003, Sabrina Vaughn went missing in Kentucky and her family spent years with no answers. It was not until 2010 that investigators finally found her skeletal remains in a shallow grave in Powell County. By then, her killer was already making headlines for something else entirely. On the 31st of July, 2009, Brea Runowitz, a 31-year-old former Bourbon County jail employee who was days away from starting a new job with the Department of Homeland Security, was found murdered at her home in Cynthiana, Kentucky. She had been raped and beheaded. Her 2 daughters, who were 7 and 8 years old, had been asleep in the house when it happened. Bass Webb, her ex-boyfriend, became the prime suspect. That same year, Webb also drove his car into a pre-trial officer and a deputy sheriff in the Bourbon County Jail parking lot in an attempt to kill them. He was convicted of attempted murder for that and sentenced to 37 years in prison. During a separate court hearing, he spat directly in the face of Bourbon County District Judge Vanessa Dixon. At a 2016 court appearance, he arrived with a tattoo freshly done on the back of his skull. It was a list titled "Kill Rats," naming judges, prosecutors, cops, and media. Webb pleaded guilty to the murder of Brea Runowitz and was sentenced to 50 years in prison in September 2012. He was then tried separately for the murder of Sabrina Vaughn. When the judge asked him to stand and receive his sentence for that second murder, he refused. The judge sentenced him to life in prison anyway, to run on top of everything else he was already serving. Marianne Bachmeier. On the 5th of May, 1980, 7-year-old Anna Bachmeier left her mother's restaurant in Lübeck, West Germany, and was abducted by a 35-year-old neighbor named Klaus Grabowski. Grabowski had prior convictions for sexual offenses against children and had undergone voluntary castration years earlier as part of a prior legal proceeding. But he had since been allowed to take hormone treatments, and that day he sexually assaulted and strangled Anna. Her mother, Marianne Bachmeier, was a single parent running a small tavern in Lübeck. When Grabowski's trial opened the following year, his defense attorneys planned to argue that the hormones had affected his behavior and, further, that Anna had been attempting to blackmail him. When Marianne heard that, she made a decision. On the 6th of March 1981, the 3rd day of Grabowski's trial at the Lübeck District Court, she took a seat in the courtroom with a .22 caliber Beretta pistol in her purse. When Grabowski moved toward the microphone to make a statement, she stood up, pulled out the gun, and opened fire. She fired 8 times, hitting him 6 times in the back. He collapsed and died on the courtroom floor. She was arrested immediately. A judge who approached her afterwards said she told him she had wanted to shoot Grabowski in the face, that she shot him in the back instead, and that she hoped he was dead. She was convicted of manslaughter and unlawful possession of a firearm and sentenced to 6 years in prison, of which she served 3 before being released on probation. Marianne Bachmeier died in September 1996, at age 46 from pancreatic cancer. She was buried beside Anna in Lübeck. Judge John Murphy.
Say, Judge, he doesn't pay. What are you doing about it, Judge? What are you doing?
On the 2nd of June 2014, Brevard County Judge John Murphy was working through his morning docket in a Florida courtroom, and tensions had been building for a while. Assistant Public Defender Andrew Weinstock refused to make any announcement on behalf of his clients regarding whether they wanted to waive their right to a speedy trial. Murphy's frustration escalated with each case. Murphy then told Weinstock on camera that if he wanted to fight, they could go out back, and that he would beat him. Then both men left the bench and walked into the hallway together. Weinstock said Murphy attacked him. Murphy denied throwing any punches. The deputy who followed them in said she found both men grabbing at each other's collars when she arrived, and when she stepped between them, all 3 of them shifted into the wall. Murphy came back into the courtroom without Weinstock and continued calling cases. 8 defendants had no attorney present, and he proceeded through all of them anyway. The Judicial Qualifications Commission later recommended a 4-month suspension, a significant fine, and continued mental health counseling. Murphy's legal team cited PTSD from his combat deployment to Afghanistan as contributing context. The Florida Supreme Court went further than the commission recommended. On the 17th of December 2015, they permanently removed Murphy from the bench, calling the incident a national spectacle and an embarrassment to Florida's judicial system. The court found that through his conduct that day, Murphy had surrendered his right to serve, and his decade on the bench came to an end. Victor Rivas,
who was handcuffed and placed in the jury box, was repeatedly struck with closed fists.
On the 15th of May 2022, in San Antonio, Texas, 5-year-old Ethan Soto allegedly stole a bag of THC cartridges from 7-year-old Victor Rivas. Ethan's mother tracked Rivas down and paid him back for the stolen goods, hoping that would end it. Rivas wasn't done. The next day, he reached out to an underage girl on Instagram and asked her to set up a drug deal with Ethan, using her as bait. Ethan showed up to what he thought was a transaction, and Rivas was waiting. He ambushed Ethan near his home and shot him multiple times. Ethan Soto was 15 years old. His sister, Savannah Soto, would later be murdered in an unrelated incident the following year, leaving a family devastated twice over in less than 2 years. Rivas was arrested in September 2022, and his case moved through the courts over the following year. At a pretrial hearing in the 144th District Court in Bexar County on the 20th of October 2023, Rivas was brought into a courtroom that included members of the Soto family. As his case was called, he made a gesture in the direction of the family. 4 of them jumped the partition before deputies could react and began attacking Rivas right there in the courtroom. It took 2 deputies and additional law enforcement to break it up. 2 adults and 2 juveniles from the family were arrested and charged with assault and disrupting court proceedings. Rivas accepted a plea deal and was back in court in April 2025 to be sentenced. He received 40 years in prison for the murder, plus an additional 10 years for evading arrest, to be served concurrently. Jacob Larson.
His petrified target cowers in shock as the suspect violently explodes.
In December 2015, Jacob Larson was in front of Jackson County Circuit Judge John McBain in Michigan for violating a personal protection order. He had been sending dozens of Facebook messages to a former high school classmate who had a restraining order against him, and rather than stay quiet in front of the judge, he started arguing back. McBain told him he was going to spend 3 days in jail. Larson kept talking. The sentence went to 45 days, then 93. Then McBain threatened to make it a full year. Larson kept talking. When McBain finally ordered him removed from the courtroom, Larson resisted being handcuffed. A single court officer tried to get control of him, but Larson tensed up and began struggling, refusing to put his hands behind his back. McBain ripped off his judicial robe, stepped down from the bench, ran toward the 2 men, and shouted to the officer to tase Larson. The taser was drawn, but not used. McBain physically helped pin Larson to the floor and assisted in getting him restrained. Once Larson was under control, McBain walked back to the bench, still swearing, and reclaimed his seat. He later told reporters that he does not tolerate disruptions in his courtroom, and the Chief Circuit Judge confirmed afterward that a judge has the legal authority to use whatever force is necessary to maintain order. McBain settled on 93 days in county jail for the contempt, pulling back from the year he had threatened. Larson was separately charged with aggravated stalking in connection with the ongoing harassment of the young woman he had been ordered to leave alone. Stephen McDaniel. Lauren Giddings was 27 years old in the summer of 2011, a Mercer University Law School graduate preparing for the Georgia bar exam and days away from finding out whether she had passed. She never made it. Her neighbor and classmate, Stephen McDaniel, had been watching her for months through her apartment window, filming her without her knowledge. On the 26th of June 2011, he used a stolen master key to let himself into her apartment in the middle of the night. She woke up, told him to get out, and he strangled her. The following day, he went back with a hacksaw and dismembered her body in the bathroom. He left her torso in a trash can outside the complex and discarded the rest in campus dumpsters. Days later, when a local news crew arrived to cover her disappearance and a reporter informed McDaniel that a body had been found, his reaction was caught on camera. He looked like he was going to collapse. The clip became one of the most watched moments in true crime internet history. During his early court appearances, McDaniel sat completely motionless, staring ahead with wide, unblinking eyes. People who were in the courtroom described it as more unsettling than any outburst could have been. Evidence against him included his DNA on the hacksaw, a stolen master key to her apartment, her underwear found in his dresser, and videos on his computer showing him filming her through her window days before she was killed. In April 2014, a week before his trial was set to begin, McDaniel pleaded guilty to murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 2041. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari.
That is a charge called homicide felony murder. It is life without parole. It requires a DNA sample to be taken upon arrest, which is often like a cotton swab or in the inside of your cheek.
On the 2nd of August 2018, in Solon Township, Michigan, Seth Welch called 911 to report that his 10-month-old daughter, Mary, was not breathing. When officers arrived, they found a baby who had clearly been suffering for some time. Mary's cheeks and eyes were described as sunken into her head, and the medical examiner later determined she had been dead for at least 72 hours before the call was even made. An autopsy showed Mary had gained only 1 pound in her entire life, having never been fed properly. She had also been left alone for 17 hours before being found in her crib. Welch and his wife, Tatiana Fusari, told investigators they hadn't taken Mary to a doctor due to religious objections to medical care and a fear of Child Protective Services getting involved. Prosecutors argued the child had been visibly deteriorating for weeks before she died, and the couple had simply chosen to do nothing. But when it came time to face those charges in court, neither of them seemed prepared for what was coming. Welch's jaw dropped as the judge read the charge, looking genuinely stunned by the severity of what he was facing. Seth Welch was convicted of first-degree murder and child abuse in January 2020 and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. Tatiana Fusari, who claimed during her own trial that she had been abused by Welch and was prevented from getting help for Mary, was convicted in October 2021 and sentenced to life without parole the following month. Tanner Jacobson and Cody Howard. On the 16th of October 2018, 4 inmates were being escorted out of a Lewis County, Washington courtroom in Chehalis after a court appearance. Still in handcuffs and wearing jail sandals, 2 of them decided not to go back. Tanner Jacobson, 22, who was there on reckless driving charges, and Cody Howard, 28, who was facing burglary, trafficking, stolen property, and assault charges, pivoted from the exit they were supposed to use and bolted toward the public door at the back of the courtroom instead. Judge R.W. Buzzard watched them go, then threw his robe off and ran after them. The 2 men raced through the hallway and down the stairwell, with Jacobson in the lead. Howard tripped in the corridor at one point, but recovered. Buzzard kept gaining on the second man and was yelling at them the whole way down, telling them they were only making things worse. At the bottom of the stairs, just as Howard was about to push through an emergency exit door, Buzzard grabbed him in what he later described as a bear hug. and held on until deputies arrived seconds later. Jacobson made it out of the building. He was caught a few blocks away. Both men were charged with second-degree escape on top of their existing charges. Buzzard told reporters after that he wanted to know where two desperate, handcuffed men thought they were going once they hit the public hallway with deputies just behind them, and that the answer mattered enough to chase them and find out. Bryce Rhodes.
Where they run away to, like.
Well, if we knew that, man, we wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, I wish I could help know where they was, you know.
In early May 2016, Bryce Rhodes shot and killed 40-year-old Christopher Jones on South 41st Street in Louisville, Kentucky. Two teenage brothers, one 4-year-old Larry Ordway and one 6-year-old Maurice Gordon, had been with him when it happened. So Rhodes brought them to his house. He made the group of boys there vote on whether Ordway and Gordon should live or die. Then he had them tied up, stabbed them both, and set their bodies on fire before dumping them behind an abandoned house on River Park Drive. The case dragged through the courts for years, and every step of the way, Rhodes made himself impossible to ignore. He threatened judges on camera in profanity-laced tirades. He spit on his own attorney when that attorney tried to withdraw from the case, and he threw urine on a correctional officer in jail. He arrived to at least one hearing wearing a spit mask. The trial judge gave him a formal ultimatum before jury selection: either control his behavior in front of the jury or leave the courtroom and wear an ankle stun cuff that deputies could activate if needed. In December 2023, after a trial that had been years in the making, a jury took less than an hour to convict him on all 3 counts of murder, plus tampering with evidence and abuse of a corpse. In March 2024, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge said the case stood out to her as one of the most tragic and horrific she had ever presided over. The Kentucky Supreme Court unanimously upheld the sentence in February 2026. Tracy Hunter. Tracy Hunter made history in 2012 when she became the first African-American woman elected as a juvenile court judge in Hamilton County, Ohio. Her tenure was marked by real reforms, including banning the shackling of juveniles in her courtroom, reducing default judgments, and pushing to allow ex-felons to vote. But it was also marked by controversy, and it ended with a felony charge. The charge stemmed from her brother, Stephen Hunter, who was a corrections officer at the Hamilton County Youth Center and was facing a disciplinary hearing for allegedly striking a juvenile. Before the hearing, Tracy Hunter accessed confidential disciplinary documents related to the incident and passed them to her brother, who gave them to his attorney. She was indicted on 8 felony counts in January 2014. A jury convicted her on 1 count of unlawful interest in a public contract in October 2014, and she was sentenced to 6 months in jail that December. But she didn't go. She appealed, then appealed again, and the case moved through Ohio courts and then federal courts for years, while she remained free and continued to speak publicly about the charges as politically motivated. In July 2019, she finally ran out of options. At the end of her final appeal hearing, when the moment came to comply with the order and begin her sentence, Hunter went limp and refused to move. A deputy physically dragged her out of the courtroom across the floor while supporters in the gallery stood and chanted. She served roughly 3 months of the 6-month sentence before being released in early October 2019 on credit for time served. Calvin Lloyd Griffith. On a Tuesday morning in August 2016, Calvin Lloyd Griffith walked into the attendance office of Miami Edison Senior High School in Miami-Dade, Florida. He was no longer a student there, and he had already been on probation for similar charges at the time. That did not stop him from walking up to the counter and picking up the keys to a 2013 black Volkswagen Passat belonging to one of the school's employees. He drove it out of the parking lot. School surveillance cameras caught the whole thing, and he was arrested the following morning. When he appeared in front of Miami-Dade Circuit Judge Catherine Pooler for his bond hearing that Thursday, Griffith immediately started drawing attention to himself by loudly calling out that his mother was in the courtroom waiting for him. She had brought a bag of his prescription psychiatric medications because he had stopped taking them before the arrest, which explained quite a bit. The judge set his bond at $18,500, ordered Griffith to stay away from Miami Edison permanently, and moved on with her docket. He left court charged with grand theft auto, burglary, and trespassing, all while his mother stood nearby holding the bag of medication he probably should have taken 2 days earlier. Arthur Booth. In 2015, Arthur Booth found himself in front of Miami-Dade Judge Mindy Glazer on burglary and grand theft charges. Glazer paused the proceedings and leaned forward. She asked him whether he had gone to Nautilus Middle School in Miami Beach. He had. So had she. She told him she had always wondered what happened to him after school, that he had been the nicest kid in her class, that she was sorry to see him in that courtroom. Booth started crying. She told him she hoped he could turn things around, and when he finished his sentence, she went to greet him. The video of that exchange went viral and was shared around the world as a rare example of humanity inside the justice system. 9 years passed. In August 2024, Booth, now 58, was arrested again on a series of charges that included posing as a plumber and water inspector to gain entry into the homes of elderly residents across Miami and Hialeah. In one case, he snatched a gold chain with a St. Lazarus pendant from an 85-year-old man the moment the man's back was turned. In another, he forced his way into a 7-8-year-old man's apartment in Hialeah under the same plumber cover. A third victim was robbed after he approached her on the street asking for directions. Police tracked him down through surveillance footage and found items matching the stolen jewelry when they searched his nearby hotel room. When Booth appeared in court again, Judge Glazer happened to be on the bench. She recognized him, waved at him, told him she wished it wasn't like this, and immediately recused herself from the case because of their history together. Another judge was assigned.